As a politician and minister of government, John Livingston Eckstein was a different cut from the usual. Throughout his 14 years in electoral politics and over his 2 terms as a member of parliament, he remained as reserved and unassuming as he had been throughout his teaching career at the University of the West Indies in Eckstein. When he left the university for public office at the behest of Prime Minister George Chambers in 1981, it was with a single-minded determination to serve this larger and much more demanding community to the best of his ability. John Eckstein would go on to pursue his task as a government senator and newly appointed Minister of Public Utilities and Public Transportation with a rare but typical conscientiousness, devotion to duty, and honesty, never seeking the political spotlight nor coveting the trappings of political office.
Most honest politician I've had to work with, because I've never heard anybody, friend or foe, make an adverse comment about John Eckstein's integrity or his intention, other than to be an honest, ordinary citizen discharging his responsibilities to the office he holds.
Dr. Rowley first worked with John Eckstein when they both served as members of Parliament in the 4th Parliament from 1991. Dr. Rowley having been elected as the PNM representative for Diego Martin West and Minister Eckstein representing PNM Arouca South. In that same year, they were both appointed to the cabinet of Prime Minister Patrick Manning. But it was 10 years earlier, in 1981, that John Eckstein first entered Parliament and government. His decision to leave the halls of academia for the corridors of political power had been in response to a challenge thrown out to him by then Prime Minister Chambers. A consummate writer, John Eckstein had been a regular columnist with the Trinidad Guardian. His focus in 1981 having been considerably influenced by the death on March 29th of that year of Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams, and the need for his successor George Chambers to tread carefully with his different style of governance. So his newspaper columns were largely a mixture of criticism of some of the approaches adopted by the new government and recommendations for better governance. It was on this note that Prime Minister Chambers approached John Eckstein with a challenge to take up the gauntlet, join the government, and put some of his approaches to governance to the test.
That is it exactly. He always gives jokes, and he'll always tell you that I'm here because I was always critical.
Having won the Arima constituency in the November 1981 general elections and appointed a parliamentary secretary, Ashton Ford came to know John Eckstein when he became Minister of Public Utilities and Public Transport in the Chambers government.
Yeah, we had what went beyond the call of duty, because he lived in my constituency and we became close friends. And we became friends because outside of politics, we would go to football games, cricket, because we shared a relationship outside of the politics together. And I know he was an avid swimmer. And at one time, he jokingly said that he would swim between Trinidad and Tobago. But of course, that never materialized.
John Eckstein's decision to take up the Chambers challenge and enter politics was firmly supported by his wife Monica and their 3 children, Joy, Kevin, and Chantal. Mrs. Eckstein says she was not at all uncomfortable with that decision.
He was prepared for it, I think, in a certain way, because he wanted to do things where he can really help people and do things where, everything was good. So when they called on him to be a senator, then he was, happy to do, because he figured, he could help the country, progress and make whatever department they put him in, that he would, do his best.
But despite the substantially increased demands that went with being a politician, parliamentarian, and government minister, Mr. Eckstein was able to keep as a top priority his devotion to his family.
He was still devoted to his family. He was still interested in the children doing well in school, and he always made time to be with the children, with us going visiting other countries with him at certain times where it was possible. And he always was dedicated, in that way to the family.
When we spoke with Mrs. Eckstein at their home in Santa Rosa Gardens in Arima, her husband, now 79, was at home battling a severe illness. She pointed out that her long career as a registered nurse was proving to be an asset in these circumstances. But she cherishes her recollections of those better times, when John Eckstein could not only remain uncompromisingly focused on his responsibilities, whether professional or domestic, but could always perceive a lighter side to life.
He always loved to give jokes.
Yeah.
Everything was a joke. He always, I don't know where he got them from, but he always was able to give you one. And he will just come up and say, I have a joke to give you, Even with the kids, he will always give them a joke about something, about when he was going to school, how, they didn't have electricity, and he used to use the candle fly. The candle fly will pass by, and he said that's how they used to read their books. So the children, will take that as serious. But that was a big joke for, and they say, Mommy, I can't believe that is what Daddy used to do.
That jovial side of John Eckstein was not limited to his home environment.
John Eckstein was one of the more easy persons to work with, in that he never got flustered. He was always focused on the matter at hand. He always kept the issue before any discussion. And while that was so, he also had a tremendous sense of humor. You wouldn't believe it.
That sense of humor appeared to serve John Eckstein well, even in his parliamentary debates in the House of Representatives, endearing himself to parliamentarians on both sides of the House and being able to deflate much of the barbs and picong from the opposing side.
He was well liked by both government and opposition. And when he served in the period 1981 to 1986, because he would always say, I am here to serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And he had a very good rapport with the opposition politicians.
Nor did his jovial nature detract from the considerable respect John Eckstein commanded in and out of Parliament. Minister of Justice Emmanuel George was a senior officer in the Ministry of Public Utilities and Public Transport when John Eckstein was minister. He remembers Mr. Eckstein as quite an efficient and effective minister, possessing excellent managerial skills and very supportive of his officers. Minister George added the following: "We all worked very hard for him because of that support. I remember on one occasion I had expressed a deep sense of frustration because I was not getting the required cooperation from another ministry in a particular situation. I remember Mr. Eckstein telling me that the wheels of government turn very slowly, but they turn, and it is up to us in the ministry to make them turn faster. And that is all people were asking of us. We were able to achieve quite a lot in the Ministry of Public Utilities under Mr. Eckstein." Among Mr. Eckstein's achievements, Minister George pointed to the construction of the Scarborough Port Facility, the extension of the Piarco and Crown Point Airport runways to accommodate jumbo jets, and the introduction of the Regional Health Authority system aimed at decentralizing health care. "I will always remember John Eckstein as a good minister and fine gentleman," Minister George said. Mr. Eckstein's first stint as a parliamentarian and government minister came to an end when the PNM lost the 1986 general elections to the newly formed National Alliance for Reconstruction. He would contest the elections for the first time, running for the Aruca South constituency. But that seat was not among the 3 seats won by the PNM in the then 36-seat House of Representatives. The newly minted politician would turn his attention to working as a research officer in the office of the Leader of the Opposition. In the 1991 general elections, Mr. Eckstein would once again be asked to contest the Arouca South seat for the PNM. He went on to register his first success at the polls, this time under the leadership of Patrick Manning. It was while he was serving as Minister of Health and the Environment in the Manning cabinet that John Eckstein would make several significant parliamentary interventions. The first was in January 1992, when he announced to a stunned House of Representatives that the dreaded disease cholera was, as he put it, staring Trinidad and Tobago in the face. This followed the alarming discovery of 58 cases of the disease in neighboring Venezuela, located, as Minister Eckstein reminded fellow parliamentarians, a mere 7 miles away. Venezuela had been the latest victim of a cholera epidemic that had been raging across several countries in Central and South America. Minister Eckstein went on to place Trinidad and Tobago on a cholera alert and was successful in getting the government and the parliament to agree to a comprehensive set of specific measures that were stringently implemented and which effectively kept cholera away from these shores. His second parliamentary intervention was in 1994, when he successfully piloted the Regional Health Authorities Act in the House of Representatives. Typically, John Eckstein's success in keeping a serious health threat at bay and in establishing a new national regime for health care came without any chest-thumping or fanfare.
While he was a politician, he was not one of these loud politicians who make a lot of noise and, didn't really get the job done. John Eckstein quietly got the job done. If I am to recall John Eckstein's impact on the government in which we served together, it was his constant reminder that policy had to be driven by an understanding that where there is responsibility, there ought to be authority to go with that responsibility. He will always make the case that you can't give me responsibility for something, and while I have the responsibility for discharging that thing, you don't give me the authority to do it. And there were a lot of issues like that in the public service, and still those issues still exist. And it was against that background that the conceptualized RHAs came into being to replace the Ministry of Health as the dispenser of service from the ministry.
And he was a very
he was the minister who drove that process and piloted the RHA Act against that principle that if you are giving people the responsibility to discharge, to dispense health services at the hospital complexes, those people had to have certain levels of authority. Otherwise, you'd always have calamities. By the same token, he would argue that if you had the authority, then you are to be held responsible for discharging that authority. And if you did not discharge it in the way that it ought to have been discharged, then having been given the authority, you now would have to be held accountable, and there have to be consequences.
One of the last areas of public responsibility accorded to John Eckstein was that of chairman of the Airports Authority of Trinidad and Tobago in 2008. In July of that year, he was able to negotiate a substantial grant from the United States Trade and Development Agency to support the development of critical aviation infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago. More specifically, the money would go toward formulating a strategic development plan for the improvement of aircraft maintenance and air cargo facilities at the Piarco International Airport.
Public service is not easy, and when someone volunteers or agrees to do public service, notwithstanding the general thought of politicians, in general, one must understand that public service requires an acknowledgement of sacrifice, and John Eckstein made that sacrifice for the people of Trinidad and Tobago.